We're on. Look at that. We are only a couple minutes late.
Better than nothing.
That was my fault, though. So blame it on Jeff. I mean,
Always do.
we always blame it on Jeff, but that's all right.
All right.
So,
welcome to Hosted Bar. As we were saying, I'm Erin.
we're coming in hot, I think is what the term is. I think the phrase is coming in hot.
Right. And so, Erin Ogden, I am celebrating St. Patrick's Day a little late with a Harp lager, actually in the glass, but I have the bottle nearby. And as always, Mr. Jeff Glazer, you are here, and what are you drinking?
I am drinking Irish coffee yet again because honestly, it's a pretty good like mid-afternoon drink. Not that I'm drinking like Irish coffees when I'm not on screen, but it's pretty good like mid-afternoon like because I always drink a coffee about now anyway.
Right? So just a little bit of a kick for a Friday afternoon?
Yeah, but I do want to show something off. Watch this. You actually can't see this because you can't see what I'm doing, but other people who are watching, I'm wrong hand. Wait, dang it. That way.
Okay.
Go down there and you will see it now. Subscribe and like. We have a subscribe and like button. Click them. I'm supposed to tell you to click them because that's what all the cool YouTube kids do. They all say click the subscribes and the likes, and then there's like this 5-minute like rigmarole I'm supposed to give about how you subscribe and like and comment below and whatever.
Have our 9-year-old nephew explain it to them like he explained it to us.
Yeah, they all know what to do. Like, just do what you do when you watch a freaking YouTube thing. Subscribe and like. Because if you subscribe and like, then, I mean, frankly, we're so far away from it that I'm not going to make any money from it. But at least make me feel better. And it'll make Erin feel a lot better.
It just means that we know that people are actually enjoying this and that we're not just drinking on Friday afternoons because we are bad people.
I'm not opposed to drinking on Friday afternoons just for kicks, but it would be nice to know that that people appreciate the smart things that you say and the witty banter, the witty repartee that I add to this.
So speaking of witty and smart things that were said, Leah Rowe is pretty darn smart.
Holy crap, she was awesome, wasn't she? She's just, I don't know why I'm sounding so surprised. Like, I don't mean to sound like I'm shocked that Leah said smart things. Leah's an awesome human being.
But I thought culture
is something that gets thrown around. I mean, they were talking about culture back when we were first getting our legal jobs and probably long before that. And so sometimes it feels like it's just a word that is said in like interviews or talking about companies, but it doesn't really matter or it isn't a thing. It's just a word. And I think she did a great job of showing that if it is just a word in your company, you're doing it wrong.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's right. Like, it's not just a word. It can't be just a word. Like, you can't say, hey, we're going to have a culture today, because you don't get a choice over whether you have a culture or not. You have a culture, and it's whether you're intentional about it or not as to the control that you can exert. Although what I thought one, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm jumping ahead in your outline, but what, you know, I thought sort of towards the end of the discussion, what got really interesting, I thought, is sometimes you don't have control over your culture, right? It's your employees, it's the people who work for you, it's your customers who and their perceptions of you. But importantly, we typically with culture, we're thinking internally within the company. But just because I tell my students or my employees that, you know, these are the things that I value, and these are the things that our company should value, or these are the things that our team should value. Just because I tell them that those are the things that are valued doesn't mean they actually value those things.
It doesn't mean bupkis if your actions don't support those words.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't, if your actions don't support it and you put in place policies of committing to that action, of taking people, of having people act in ways that that conform with your cultures and beliefs. It can't just be thinking that. I can't just think that I'm customer oriented. I have to actually do things that are customer oriented, right? I can't just put on my website, we're a customer oriented company that values the opinions and whatever of our customers. When the customer calls, you have to pick up the phone. When the customer has a different opinion, you have to listen, right? You have to address the issues. And that's not to say, look, I'm not a customer is always right kind of person, but I am you always have to listen to the customer.
Well, if you're going to say that you're a customer is always right company, then you have to act
right.
like
There are definitely people that are customer is always right kind of people. I'm just saying I'm not one of those people. I think customers are frequently wrong. But
But I think your point is if you've got to walk the walk that you're talking, right? You can't and I think that's where a disconnect happens a lot in companies is I think there's disconnects that happen kind of in 3 stages. One is they say these things and they put it on their websites and they put it in their employee manuals, and then in reality it doesn't match up.
Yeah, and the worst is when, not even when it's in the employee manual and on the website, the worst is when you have the all company meeting and the CEO stands in front of everybody and wastes everybody's time by saying, these are the values that we now represent, right? We have decided that over the last 50 years, these things were important, but now these new things are important. So now you're going to do those things. And there's never follow through on it. There's never, it's always these high-minded ideals that don't have any, there's no action behind it. And worse, there's no action from leadership behind it.
Right. Another kind of bucket that's similar to that, though, is when if you have a bigger company, you always have strata, right? And this
hierarchy. One
strata is living one ideal, and it doesn't trickle down, or it doesn't get pushed up, or they're saying, "Oh yeah, we're customer oriented, all of this," and then they give incentives to the people who are actually providing the customer service to do the opposite. This is a story like REI. Remember that, how they had that where they were saying, this is our culture. We want to be a team based. We want to have it be all of these things that our staff does both internally and externally. And then every single incentive and pay incentive and things like that was steering them to be the exact opposite,
right,
as a sales clerk. And so it was destroying both internal and external kind of, I think internal things is culture, external is branding a little bit, because I think they feed into each other a lot. And I want to talk about that in a little bit. But that was one thing that they had a reckoning with. And they were like, oh my gosh, we at corporate was saying this was the case. And in headquarters and in the corporate worlds, it was happening. But in the stores, it wasn't.
Right. Right. It has to happen everywhere, right? It has to be everybody that's doing it. And that message has to get through to everyone. It can't just be, it can't just be Erin telling how it's going to be. It has to be Erin acting and holding other people accountable for acting, but also getting buy-in from all of those people, communicating what the values are, and getting buy-in from everybody in the organization. It's, you can't not have the cashier not bought in to the
Right.
CEO's
I think the accountability
ideals.
goes both ways.
Yep.
Right. The accountability goes ways. I have to hold people accountable and say, okay, you're being toxic, you're not here. But everyone else has to hold the bosses accountable for letting that stuff go. Right. Letting things happen that isn't up to the ideals, or saying, well, everybody else has to live by those rules except me because I'm too high up in the food chain. And so I think having that, it has to be throughout. And one of the things that I'm always concerned about is the unintentional culture. And you talked about this before, like it's not a vacuum, right? It's not, if you don't have an intent, it's not like nothing grows. Something grows.
Right. Right.
And so that's always what concerns me. But also, one of the things I thought was really interesting was the jazz analogy.
Yeah, I think we kind of got off the rails on that at one point, but or maybe at the entire point was maybe off the rails. But yeah.
Well, I think it was off the rails, but I think it was also really interesting that you can't let people run amok, but you also have to let people own where they're at, right? You can't just say this is how you have to be, or maybe you can, but then it's a very different culture than if you can't say you value individuality and then say, but you have to wear
a suit and tie. Right, you have to wear a blue suit.
And not only suit and tie, you have to wear a very specific suit and tie.
Right, IBM, right? You have to wear the blue pinstripes and the white button down and the blue ties, right? That you can't have that and then also value individuality, right? Those two things do not go together. And this idea that it's okay to have deviation so long as you have high level priorities, right? Everybody needs to be open and honest and transparent, right? Everybody needs to do that. But that doesn't necessarily mean, that everybody and everybody has to be professional, right? But my definition of professional is very different from your definition of professional, right? And is very different from IBM's definition of professional, none of which are wrong. And so when I show up and I'm wearing my, sweet blue cardigan and Elvis t-shirt, that as long as I'm being professional, that doesn't make me any less professional than the person wearing the pinstripes and the tie.
So I think I think you're showing a little bit of I don't know, blinders or bias. Like that's the culture you want to build. The culture says that that's what you think professionalism means, and that clothing doesn't matter, and that you're going to be very frustrated in any company that says otherwise. And that's the culture you want to build. But I think there are other companies that are very much like, well, we don't want the Elvis t-shirt because we do feel it sends the wrong message. And I don't think that that's wrong for everyone. I think that's wrong for me. But I think that there are people they thrive in that. They thrive in the I want the mahogany desk. I want the suits. I want that because that's how I function better. And I think it's really, really important for a company to make sure it's clear which one you are. Because if you are the Elvis wearing, the Elvis t-shirt wearing person, and the company is saying we don't put stock in suits when they actually do, you're toast, right? Yeah. And if we're saying, oh yeah, like you can wear suits, but every time you show up in a suit, we're going to tease you, the person who's very much into that might feel really uncomfortable. So it's really important that you are clear what your expectations are and clear what your culture is, so that way people can know, hey, this isn't a good fit for me, or this is a good fit for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is what I think is really interesting because, I mean, I work at the university, right? I have a team of law students, and especially this time of year, everybody's always talking about hiring and getting jobs and all that stuff. And
Right.
And so, one of the questions that always comes up, or, one of the things that students are always concerned about, and one of the things that law firms are always concerned about, and I'm using law as an example here because that's what I happen to know best, but this is applicable anywhere, right? Is how do you communicate that culture, right? How do you, as a potential employee, determine that culture, right? Because you can show up in the office for an interview, but you're going to be wearing a suit and tie because you're there for the interview, or whatever not to be gendered about it, but I wear suit and ties when I show up for interviews. But, you're there wearing your interview gear, and the people who are interviewing you are wearing their interview gear, right? And it's not a true experience, right? You're not catching them on the day when they're not expecting you, right? It's not it's not a normal day. It's not a normal interaction. And in fact, they try very hard not to give you normal interactions. Your day is very scheduled. You're going to meet with HR, then you're going to meet with this partner, then you're going to meet with that partner, then you're going to meet with these associates, and all of those people have been told they're meeting with you that day, so they're all on their best behavior, they're all wearing their interview gear, they all have their interview voices on, so none of them are dropping F-bombs, none of them are talking about the football games, none of them are, none of them are frustrated at their bosses. None of them are, right? You don't get any of that. And so how do you communicate as an employer to a potential employee, or how do you as a potential employee discover the reality behind the facade? And I think that part's really hard.
Right? I think it's really hard as an employee. And I also think I find it hard as an employer. How do we let people know what it is? So when we did our last round of interviews, Colin didn't show up in a suit, right? So
no, if I remember correctly, he hadn't even had a haircut in the last 5 months.
Right? But I think that's
and was wearing his hat. It's wearing his ball cap.
Technically, I think he was wearing a Fat Bastard t-shirt.
A Fat Bastard t-shirt and a baseball cap, which I think probably says everything you need to know about the company culture at OGS, right? So in many ways, he's a walking advertisement of the company culture.
But I think you're right that is the exception, not the rule, because I didn't have on my beer t-shirt and hat, right? Yeah. But I also tend not to be in that for work days.
Well, I was going to say, to that point though, if you are the kind of person that doesn't dress like that, and here I'll name drop one of our favorite attorneys up in northern Wisconsin, Thomas Burton.
Right?
That if you're Thomas Burton, awesome attorney, by the way, if you're up in his area, you should hire him. He's amazing. But if you're him and you walk into a video interview and you see Colin on the other side, again, I'm not casting any aspersions. They know each other. They're friendly. They like each other, kind of thing. This is not. I'm not trying to point them against each other, but professional appearance wise, if you're interviewing with each of them and you're one or the other, and you see that on the other side, you don't know what message to take out of that.
Well, I don't know. I think you do know the message more than if Colin had shown up in a suit. I think the message is better sent with them both being, because then at least you know to ask. Whereas if Colin had shown up in a suit, I think that both might have gotten the wrong message.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point here is that it's really hard to communicate that, right? It's really hard to communicate that.
I think it's even more hard if you don't know your culture.
Yeah, 1,000%.
Right? At least we know who we are and we know what that is, but I think there's a lot of companies that may not be as in tune because they haven't had the chance to have Leah teach them. And I think that can be difficult. And so one thing that we try to do is check in, and by no means am I saying that we're perfect at it, but I do think it's one thing that we think about. One of the things that when I was listening to Leah, I was actually hearkening back a lot to Don Stanley's talk. Mm-hmm. Because like I said, I think culture and branding and community, two sides to the same coin, right? Like one thing that customers and consumers are doing now are wanting to know what you stand for as a company, wanting to know what you do. Do you treat your companies well? Do you treat your employees well? Do you treat your vendors well? This is something that's coming up more and more. Like, what are your labor practices? What are your standards? What is your company culture?
Yeah.
So that way I know if I want to buy from you, which I think is really interesting. I don't think that was, I wasn't in business in the 80s. I was in, Bo and Luke Duke t-shirts, but I don't feel like that was as big of a thing. Even in the 90s, I think it started, I feel like we started seeing that more in the 90s. In the 2000s is where it really started coming through, and certainly now, where consumers want to know your culture to know if they want to give you money for it.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, right? That the basic point is well taken, is that your culture and your brand are inextricably entwined, right? I don't know that I want to go too far down the Bo and Luke Duke thing, because that's a whole other bag of worms. But
I'm just saying, I wasn't a business person in the 80s. I was a grade schooler.
Yeah. No, and I do think, though, that over the past, 5 years, certainly, but, let's call it the Bush administration, since the since the early 2000s, right? The culture of a company, or if a company can have beliefs, and the Supreme Court has told me that companies can have beliefs, apparently, because Hobby Lobby can have beliefs, and they can impose those beliefs on their employees and prevent their employees from doing things with their own bodies that the company thinks is wrong. But anyway, not to get too far down that rabbit hole, the point is that there are a subset of consumers that are evaluating companies based on the value and culture that the company has. And that gets, it's not, I might disagree here that it's not always reflected in the branding. And here I would point to Chick-fil-A, right? Where Chick-fil-A's branding has never been explicitly religious, has never been explicitly discriminatory, but they're
same with Hobby Lobby
or Hobby Lobby, right? They don't go out, they don't run ads saying we love Jesus. Although, Chick-fil-A being closed on Sundays is pretty much same
with Hobby Lobby.
They were both, they weren't exactly hiding it either. But the branding wasn't, look at our personal values that we hold. But the company culture was such that consumers came to understand through the actions of the
Right.
employees, including their leadership, what the company culture was. And then consumers were judging the company and implying that culture to the company's brand. And
I think that there's a lot of that, right? Where it doesn't have to be. I think Patagonia intertwines them inextricably.
Yeah.
I think Hobby Lobby and Chick-fil-A were trying not to, but consumers were saying, or at least not all consumers, but a lot of consumers were saying, I don't buy that, or I don't care what you're trying to sell me, I care what you do. And so I think in both cases, it just shows that culture doesn't just impact what's within the walls of your company. It goes much further than that. And that's, I guess, what scares me the most.
Well, I think, and this will be a great discussion when we have Gage in a couple weeks to talk about branding, right? I don't know necessarily that culture and brand are necessarily the same, two sides of the same coin, but they definitely influence each other. And in fact, when you have a culture that doesn't mesh with your brand, or you have a very explicit culture that isn't reflected by your brand, that consumers will imply that culture onto your brand, whether you want them to or not, to consequences, whether those are good consequences or bad consequences, are for Hobby Lobby and Patagonia and whoever to make up their own minds about.
So as we wrap up, I do want to point out that Gage Mitchell of Modern Species is coming, and he's not going to necessarily talk about branding per se. He's going to talk about running a mission-driven business.
Oh, awesome.
And so I think it actually is a perfect
Even
tie-in to what we've been talking about.
Exactly.
Because it's how brand and culture combine with your mission, and both internally and out into the world. And it wasn't intentional. I just was glad to get on Gage's schedule, but I think it ends up being the perfect culmination. What does a mission-driven business mean? And how does brand and how does culture and how does all of this stuff come together when you say, as a for-profit, not a non-profit, a for-profit business who wants to do more than just make money for its owners, how does all that impact what you do?
Can I just say that we have to be like the luckiest vodcast, videocast, podcast, I don't know, whatever the hell we are, that we get to have these people on to talk to us. Like Leah, Gage, Ashley, Don, the LBW guys. Like, how freaking lucky are we? These people are amazing. I love being able to just talk to them. It's so cool.
I just think that one of these days they're going to figure out that we're just making shit up.
Oh, I think they know that. I think they just find us entertaining.
But I'm just glad they do, because I find them totally interesting, totally entertaining, and you're right. We're lucky that they're willing to take half an hour of their time and shed some light into our dim little brains.
Like I said today, I'm just the monkey and the fez clapping the cymbals together.
Yeah, but you got the bow tie often.
That's it for us.
I think that's, on that note, how can we end but on fezzes and bow ties? Because bow ties
are cool.